Hey, it's Antonia Dodge with Personality Hacker. One of the things I love most about hosting profiler training live events is that you never know who's going to end up on the main stage. We like to invite our friends and other leaders in the type community, and in this particular video, we interview AJ Drenth and his partner Elaine from Personality Junkie, who came by to talk a little bit about what's going on in their world. All right, so we invited AJ and Elaine. If you do not know AJ Drenth and Elaine, how do you pronounce your last name?
Schallock.
Schallock, thank you. They are from Personality Junkie. Oh no, excuse me. Yeah, Personality Junkie. And AJ has written a couple of books on INTPs. They are back there. How many?
I've written 4 books. 2 on INTPs, and then 2 more general books on type. One's called My True Type, which is kind of a path to self-identifying your type, and then the other is called 16 Personality Types, which is largely a kind of a general description of all the 16 types.
Awesome. And you're currently writing a book on INFJs.
Yeah, I'm in the process of doing an INFJ book, hopefully to be out in 2020, sometime mid next year probably.
Okay, awesome. Yeah.
And you've been working with Personality Junkie since 2009.
Yes, I founded the blog in 2009, put up a few career articles, and a year later kind of checked in on, and suddenly there was traffic, and I was, oh my God, people are reading what I wrote, and Google is my friend. So it kind of motivated me to keep going and keep developing, and then I met Elaine a couple years later, and she was like a catalyst, and our relationship is you guys maybe experienced something similar. It's just been kind of symbiotic as far as really sort of incubation of ideas, which have sort of been coming out through writing and other ways through our blog.
That's great. So what kind of audience do you attract? Is it a lot of people that are similar to you? Do you attract like a lot of INTPs reading your stuff?
We do. I would say our predominant audience is IN personality types. And, part of that is because we've sort of emphasized the IN types in a lot of our writing. Like a lot of type junkies, we kind of start with an emphasis on our own type and understanding our own type and kind of, especially as introverts, I think, and then kind of branch out from there and sort of seeing yourself through the system, understanding the system, especially for me as an INTP, the system is like, okay, I got to get the system down and then I can interpret myself in light of the system and so forth. So, but yes, as far as the types are concerned, like you guys, we tend to focus a little bit more on intuitive types in general.
Sure.
I have a lot of articles for the NP types as well. So actually developed a course last year focused on the ENP and INP types about finding your life path. And so a lot of people have enjoyed that. And so that was kind of moving beyond my comfort zone of just like pen to paper and actually like getting in front of a camera or like, stretching myself this way, being up on stage is absolutely terrifying. But
or in front of a camera. In front of a camera is
How about
so
both at the
scary.
same time?
In front of a camera.
Yeah.
Out of your comfort zone right now.
Out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
Good. Rule number 2.
Trying to draw on the yoga breath to like stay focused.
Good. So what's the motive? As an introverted feeling person, I'm interested in motivation. Why are you doing this? Like, what's the deal? Like, what draws you to this? Why do you keep writing? Like, why do you keep doing it after 10 years?
You want to start?
You want me to start?
Sure.
Yeah. Elaine, INFJ. Now it's like a habit. I cannot do it. Yeah, and if you're an INFJ, probably shout out to INFJs. I've never seen so many INFJs in one room. It's amazing. Yes, it's awesome. But I like, because I'm an INFJ, I suppose, like that draw to really plumb and deeply understand and abstract that material out. He's totally right. Like I discovered the type process pretty young actually, but then came back to revisit it at a time when I was probably like a lot of folks, like circling around, struggling to figure out what my like career path was supposed to be, or what my life path is supposed to be, and looking for like who I am and what makes me feel energized, what makes me feel joyful, what makes me happy. And so like this process of like returning back to my type really has been like, I found myself through that writing process. That has been probably a really natural way for me to self-express as an INFJ. I do love having one-on-one conversations whenever possible, but that writing process, and especially working with AJ, because we have just enough difference to really like spur a creative process when we have conversations that inspires me to like pull up new insights, and I think similarly inspires his NE to kind of run with something and see how far that's going to go, and that exchange has been really beneficial. But we do it because like the feedback has been phenomenal. I mean, again, mostly like strong from the N community and strong from the IN community, like hearing INFJs and other IN like types come forward and say, wow, you like hit on something that is so meaningful for me that I didn't understand, and it's helped me grow, and it's helped me like learn things about myself that just didn't quite make sense, or I didn't have words for, but then you guys put words to it. That feeling is like, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to know you're helping provide that insight.
I've never met anyone with a more like intuitive, quick understanding of people than you, and like so you've really been helpful to me as an NE type. I've always been like, explore this system, but never feel like quite confident enough to like go forward with any particular system. As an INTP, I can kind of like see flaws in everything, and like which kind of undercuts my confidence to like go forward with things. And so our like having a partner to like resonate those ideas back and forth with has been instrumental in giving me the confidence to like move forward and actually put myself out there in writing, and then into some of these other avenues as well. Getting back to your question though, Joel, about what keeps us going. For me, the idea of purpose has always been a core thing for me. Like finding it's what started my interest in type. What's my purpose in the world? What's like, who am I? We were talking at lunch how, the modern world is just like myriad possibilities. Kind of the idea of like a traditional path or an expected path is kind of like fallen by the wayside. And we're all expected to like, as individuals, like really like figure out who we are for ourselves. And I think as N types, we're especially compelled to do that. We don't want to necessarily just follow a prescribed path. And so for me, type has always kind of been like this more objective system that provides a starting point for identity. Like instead of having to just like, I guess self-analyze and pick out the most salient parts of myself, instead there's like a system that gives me a framework for understanding, okay, I'm an INTP. Like what kind of things do INTPs do? Like what does self-development look like for an INTP? And so there's a little bit of like a convergence of ideas that would lead me to know who I am, like what my path is. And that's kind of been like a touch point for me, like as far as not feeling just at sea in this world of possibilities. And I think other people have had the same experience with type and are maybe attracted to it for a similar reason. And so seeing other people kind of have these aha moments and like also find a sense of purpose and direction from and self-understanding from like discovering type has always been like a motivating factor for me as well. So.
I think the reason why we like your work and want to feature and highlight you is you have a similar philosophy around type that we do, which is that we use it for growth and development. And it's not about just perpetual diagnostic and keep flaying open the system and better system, but specifically what's the prescription around it. So we were having a conversation at lunch about type development. And of course, if you are familiar with Personality Hacker, you know that we always say, develop the copilot. One of the reasons why we do that is because we live in a soundbite world, and if you take one thing away from us, we want you to focus on developing the auxiliary function. But we had a really interesting conversation around how type development isn't as linear as maybe sometimes we'll paint it, right? Like develop the auxiliary, and then the tertiary, and then the inferior. It's a little less linear than that. Can you speak a little bit to how you guys see type development working out, and sort of what your experience has been with developing your functions?
Right. So early, and I don't know, some people weren't in here, I guess, earlier for the alums were out of the room for the the embodiment exercises with the dominant function, but you were talking about the dominant function as being that thing that you really can't turn it off. Sometimes we try, but it's always kind of that, I think you called it, is it the brick, or the sort of that structure that you can't it's going to find its way one way or another. And so I think most people like obviously start there and they know that one well. My experience has been probably, yes, to some extent, developing that auxiliary function, my FE. Those of you who have already talked to me probably sense I have a pretty strong FE, which I do. But that one has been, again, very, like, absolutely key in breaking me out of the NI tunnel vision. I think that is what can, or at least for an introverted function, I want to say, which, NI being the introverted function as the first function, gets a tunnel vision that without the auxiliary function, you don't, it's like it gets stuck, like you're hitting the gas full force on that one function and then trying to give it an outlet, like get the car to start moving a little bit, and extrovert that energy out some way. But like it doesn't always happen in my experience. It doesn't always happen in a straight line. I've had personally a lot of experience jumping the function stack, and that's terminology we use. We call it jumping the stack between the dominant and the inferior function. So there are times where you're kind of trying to find that extroverted outlet and maybe don't quite go to the copilot if it's not as well developed. And I felt that as well in an earlier exercise where we were, given a time to try to experience NI. You set the timer and like asked to, sort of imagine or let whatever comes up in NI just come up. And what is that? And a lot of the NI types started explaining, I like visual, like many, many sensory details, painted like a colorful landscape. That's like what starts to come up. But and I think that's often true. There's this like pull between NI and SE so that you're, jumping a little bit there, but without the copilot, like you're saying, you don't start making sense of what that information is about until you start to develop the copilot or develop that auxiliary function so that you can express the vision or express the perception that you're getting. And again, it's just been like, it's never A, B, C, D. It's so much more organic than that, I would say. And that's why this process of doing it by almost, to the letter of, well, if I just run the test and then it should be this very like, the TEs will love this, I know, like run the test and it'll be, very straightforward. And that's how I came out and that's how it was. And then I developed this and then I developed this. And sometimes it goes that way, and sometimes it's just so much more organic than that, and it depends on the life circumstance, like how someone's been raised and what they've been encouraged to develop. And so parts of the personality little islands start popping up, and it can be difficult to start to connect them, until enough data is gathered over time to start seeing, and I wants to see the pattern. What's the pattern?
I resonate with that. I think I see it like a three-legged race. Mm-hmm. We talked about this at lunch where we recommend people take the first step of that three-legged race with their copilot. Mm. But there's access points for people in all the different functions they have. So sometimes you might run into somebody that took that first step with a different function, and that's okay as they're developing that, because you can't go very far until you pull the other with you, right? Because you're developing yourself in a holistic way. So I think the reason we talk about copilot development first is we think that's again, a soundbite culture that we live in, that's like the best soundbite we can plant in someone's head, the best idea we can give them of the first step to take if they're brand new to something around development. And I think you're right. I think there is a lot of growth that happens maybe non-linearly, but that's that step idea.
And I think that one's more accessible as a rule to people so they can start to wrap their mind. They've seen, once you reach, I think, a certain, point of development or age, usually, there's a sense in which, yes, I do recognize that auxiliary, that copilot function, and maybe I have seen that come up. And so once they have something to, put their finger on that they can say, yes, that is that function, then they know what it is so they can start to tap it more easily. But if it's one of the lower functions, it can be harder to conceptually anyway know what you're talking about, or even experientially know what you're talking about. So how do you develop that if you haven't?
And I've kind of noticed too that, kind of piggybacking on that point, that as I in thinking about role models, like for me as an INTP, looking at any dominance, like Antonia, for instance. Antonia is an ENTP, and so what does my growth process look like as an INTP going forward? It may well look like becoming more of an ENTP in certain ways. So like what does an INTP with good NE development look like? And I looked at Antonia, I'm like, wow, that's like, she's amazing. If I wanted to grow into something, it would look like a lot more like that as far as my NE copilot development.
Right. And I was mentioning that all of my most beloved mentors have been generally INTPs. When I was first leaving the religion of my youth, basically it felt like the infrastructure of my mind was being pulled apart. And I was very fortunate to have an INTP friend at the time who had been a philosophy major. And so we just had endless conversations around philosophy.
Those were good days, weren't they?
Yes, they were good days. And formal logic and debates and all sorts of really good, strong TI conversations. Another one of my INTP mentors taught me systems thinking. And so that actually ended up creating a new infrastructure for my entire mind. And then I found myself. And we were talking about how, I don't know if introverts understand the challenge that extroverts have in finding intimacy with themselves. It's actually one of the biggest challenges that extroverts face because they're so accommodating to the outside world. It's very easy to lose who you are in all of that. And so having a mentor that helps you get into a place where you can find intimacy with yourself as an extrovert is very, very, very powerful. And so I have had people question whether or not I'm an ENTP. Of course, 100% of people have had their type questioned by other people. Yeah. It is a reality, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody's going to question your type. But I think it's in part because I moved more towards a centered sort of still INTP place with the development of the TI. And I think that's oftentimes what happens. But I thought what was so interesting is that if we look at, I don't know if this is true. I haven't really seen this pattern. I have not studied this pattern enough to know whether or not this is true, but I'd love to hear your guys' feedback on this. I discovered that when I developed my auxiliary function, the next place was not development of my tertiary. It was a balancing act of my auxiliary and my tertiary. All of a sudden, they were in this tug of war. And then I had to figure out a really good choreography between those two. And once I figured out a choreography and it felt like it was time to develop my tertiary, I couldn't access it until I got a ballast with my inferior. It was the more rooted I was in my SI, the more it felt like my FE had like a place to really open itself up. Does that make sense? Which is a non-linear path and not one that you would imagine going through. So I haven't studied this enough for everybody, but I'd love to hear maybe how your type development has looked in the 4 function stack.
You go. You go.
Did I ask the wrong question? Okay.
I'm going to kind of indirectly get at your question here.
Okay, good.
In true NP fashion. One thing we talked about at lunch too was we've observed that a surprising number of people kind of end up pursuing the 3-year-old function at kind of a surprisingly early time in life, maybe around early adulthood, college age. We've noticed that, for instance, a lot of INFPs seem to pursue like careers in computers and science, and it kind of makes you scratch your head otherwise. Why would an FI lead go into what's characteristically a T profession? And we've seen this kind of over and over. It's almost expected, the INFP like becoming a math teacher, and these sorts of things, or a computer scientist. And it's like, why? Why is that the case? And it just speaks to the kind of the power that the inferior function has, or the 3-year-old, as far as compelling us toward wholeness, right? So if I'm a TI dominant and my FE is like deeply buried in there, and this like what some have called the missing function or the missing part of yourself. There's like we're kind of like on a quest to eventually get that piece of us to make us whole, right? And so one thing we've talked about is like there can be a desire to like kind of shortcut the process by getting to that inferior right away, and it almost like on the surface looks like it's going to like do the trick, because if I as an INTP can just find love, just find that person, and then like, oh, I have it, I'm infatuated, I'm in love, and then shortly thereafter there's like a letdown. no longer is that good enough, because now I'm back in TI mode, and I'm like, now that quick fix wasn't enough. And so there's that tendency to, like, what we call jump the stack to the inferior function. And I guess what I've learned and what Elaine has learned is there is an importance into that auxiliary, that copilot for me in particular, which is heavily involved, like researching, exploring ideas, writing, building, crafting, creating my own enterprise. Like, to me, that has been like a salvation point for me. That's where I found flow. It's not in like chasing love, which would be chasing the lowest, my inferior function, hoping for completion. It's been, creating it and building this website and writing books, and through that I've come to like kind of experience wholeness, and then bringing Elaine into my life has just kind of been like the cherry on top of all that. So yeah.
And your willingness to put your ideas out there.
Yes.
Is how you attract.
That's what I was going to say.
Exactly.
That's what I was going to say too, is that it's almost like that's the beauty of the auxiliary function, which I think is what you're getting at, is that's the one that I think helps push us out of our comfort zone of either the introverted or the extroverted comfort zone, whether it's as an extrovert going ahead and going in and doing that self-work, which might feel like a foreign territory and a little scary, because what is that and who am I, and what if there's nothing there and I don't even know myself, and that's terrifying. Or if you're an introvert, it's, the putting yourself out and saying, okay, I feel like I know who I am and I've gathered all this information and I've done the self-work, but oh my gosh, I can't put myself out there. Like, what if I get shot down, and what if everybody hates everything I have to say, and what if people think I'm crazy, and I sounds crazy most of the time, so probably they will. And then once you realize that it's safer to like start putting yourself out there with the auxiliary function, or putting yourself in there with the auxiliary function as an extrovert, and get comfortable there, that's where maybe you're saying, then yes, like you start realizing, okay, there is this introverted realm as an extrovert that I'm now learning about and discovering, and that includes the 3-year-old child, or the inferior function, and now maybe I might think about cozying up to that more as well. And then the same thing for extra. I have to be willing. My personal struggle, for sure, as an INFJ, has been be personally willing to put myself in an SE situation, like here on stage, where you have that opportunity. Like, it takes some measure, yes, of like getting that SE experience. Like, I've got to come out of I have to leave my like comfortable little apartment and my like laptop and my wonderful little writing space, and I have to like come out and like see the world and talk to people. But then you get that auxiliary function opportunity, like the FE opportunity to speak or to start to relate, and then magically this other stuff starts to come up, and the like NI stuff just starts to flow out instead of being just bottled up in my own head and my own like space. There's a chance for it to grow, and that's where that like personal growth and development comes from. But it's very hard. It's like absolutely, it happens in like little bits, and you're like little rabbit coming out of your, or a little gopher coming out of your hole, and like, I might try this for a little bit, and then like, oh, that was kind of scary, I'm gonna go back to my safe place, and then, maybe try a little bit more being out of the comfort zone, okay, and then so that's part of that nonlinear process as well, is sort of like being okay with stepping out of the comfort zone of the dominant function enough to get your feet wet. And then, okay, yes, I know where my ground is, where I start from. Now that I know that's a safe place, I can push a little harder and grow a little more here, So.
As an INTP, I feel like what's scary for me about being up here is I feel like I'm not in full control of the circumstance. And like in my office, I can control every little thing. I can control what goes on the website, everything is under my control. When I'm engaging with someone else, though, there's not enough time for me to be completely under control, and that's when NE comes out, and it seems like it's out of control sometimes, I realize. So,
Yeah. Well, and being able to control people's perceptions of you.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
that, for FE, it's like, I always tease, I want everybody to like me, but it's not teasing. I literally want every human being on the planet to like me. And when they
Unlike
don't,
Joel.
right? His FIT is like, did I get it done? Then we're good,
Yeah.
right? And I'm always like, be nicer, which is weird because I'm the thinker and he's the feeler. But my FE just wants everybody to like me, and when they don't, I'm so hurt by it.
Yeah.
I'm like, what did I do wrong?
I feel that.
Right, and then my TI gets in there and goes, well, it is what it is, right? That's the reality of the situation. And I feel like the more I've allowed myself to integrate at this point in my life, the SI rootedness, because there's a sense that, well, what happens when everybody doesn't like me? Like, what is the consequence of that? Did anybody die? Like, was everybody safe, right? Did I get to go back home, and do I have a safe place to, am I still in my life, and is everything all right? And the answer is, of course, of course. And what's the reality? My experience has told me that I haven't met anybody that 100% of people like. Because it's really not about the individual. It's about what's happening for the person that doesn't like them, what's going on for them. Yeah. So if I can just root myself in my SI, then my FE has a little bit of a break. It's not so anxious and so needy, right? My FE is now not about me and people's impressions of me. It's now about what I can give and whether or not I'm of service. And I think that control need for all of us who are TIFEs, the need to control people's perceptions of us, and whether or not we're connected, and whether or not they like us.
Right.
And I would imagine that your sense of rootedness probably actually expands. I mean, I don't know. I'm just making a pattern on the fly. But if I can use myself as a control...
Are you empowering me right now?
I am empowering. I would imagine that your sense of rootedness probably has been to some extent facilitated by your relationship that you know is there and
Exactly.
fuels you. And that's something you don't have to worry about as much.
Exactly.
That's a really good point. I think you're right. I think he's in some ways been willing to take more risks or be more assertive with respect to expressing the thoughts. Like, again, I think NE has lots of ideas going around and thinking, and then one minute sounds like the best idea ever, and then the next minute he's like questioning it and unraveling and being like, this was the worst idea ever, and what was I thinking?
Totally.
And so I call it going down the rabbit hole, and he'll come out and then we'll talk about it, and then I feel like through that process of kind of, just fleshing out all of the things that were might have been holding him back, then he's more willing to, okay, I'll put that out there now.
Yeah, we reality check each other a little bit.
We try.
And then it's always nice to come to a forum like this and find that a lot of the ideas are being resonated with other people as
Or
well.
that there's lots we don't know, and we're still
Exactly.
learning. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys, for being here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We appreciate hearing from you.
Yeah.
Give them a hand for being out here. Thanks, guys.
If you want to take your typing skills to the next level and become a professional profiler, we'd love to invite you to the next live event of the Profiler Training course.